I went to my first ever IndyCar race last weekend at the Arlington Grand Prix, and as a lifelong Formula One fan, here's what I thought about it. I have two main categories that I'm going to kind of judge this by, and the first one's going to be the fan experience, so what's it like to go there and watch the race and get around the venue. And then number two is going to be what I thought of the cars and racing compared to Formula One. So when it came to the venue, it's a street track, so it's in Arlington. It's in the entertainment district, so it's between Dallas Cowboys Stadium and the Texas Rangers, both the old stadium and their new stadium. So it's in a very tight area. As a fan, there was not a lot of space in the venue out on the outside of the track. On the inside, it was a big bubble because it's like a parking lot. They had a fan zone. Java House had a booth, so I tried some of the Java House coffee. It was good, but I don't think I would pay for it, to be honest. They were the title sponsor of the race, so their logo's everywhere. They had like 2 cars in the race. I've been to multiple types of racing, and usually the venues are pretty free-flowing. Like, you can kind of go wherever you want, and they might tell you not to stand and stop in certain areas. Pedestrian, like, footbridges over the track, they don't want you stopping there and watching. But one thing I found weird about the venue was everywhere you tried to go, so like even walking over the bridges over the track, people were like checking your tickets to see where your seats were and like using that to allow you to or not to cross the bridge. It was odd to me because I'm used to every Formula One venue I've been to, including even the street track of Miami. I mean, I guess it's the same. It's an NFL stadium parking lot. They didn't really restrict your movement through the venue the way the Arlington Grand Prix did. It gave a lot of delays because they still did check your ticket in the grandstand, which is normal. I found it odd that they felt the need to police people moving around the venue based on their tickets. And then, of course, they're like, guys, have your tickets pulled up. I don't like feeling controlled, and I think that was kind of part of it. It felt controlling, and it also just literally created a delay that felt unnecessary because you're still not going to get into that grandstand if you don't have the ticket for it. The food near our stand I felt was pretty fair priced, a lot cheaper than Formula One venue food. There was a Cane Rosso, which if you're from DFW, you probably know them. It's like a really high-end pizza. The pizzas were $18, which is I think what they cost like at the restaurant anyway. So it wasn't a huge gouge. I don't know if the venue controlled that or the restaurant itself, but either way, I appreciate that. Another positive with the venue was that they had plenty of screens everywhere. So they have big screens put up where you can see, they'll show different onboards, and I think it's the same as the broadcast footage, but I'm not really sure. It also has the timing across the top, like old school NASCAR style. So it goes, 1st to 25th, like scrolling across this way. That was nice that they had plenty of screens everywhere you looked, because some venues don't. And then you kind of have to either like strain your neck looking off to the side to see it, or you just have no clue what's going on during the race. A lot of times, especially at a street track, you can't really see very much of the track at all from your seat. So it's kind of hard to tell what's going on in the big picture of the race, especially when there's a lot of cars on track and once the field spreads out, maybe people are getting lapped. So having a lot of screens around definitely helped with that. I don't know if this is due to it being in Arlington or it being a street track. There was a lot of hype around it because it was like, oh wow, IndyCar is coming to Arlington. A lot of people were moving during the race, and we were on like the 3rd row towards the bottom of the bleachers, and I found it kind of irritating because it felt like a sick joke, but it was like every single time the cars came by, somebody was like walking around in front of us. People came late after the race started. People like watched like the first 15 laps and left. I've been to a lot of dirt oval racing, and those people are locked in. I've been to NASCAR quite a few times as well, and I don't ever remember feeling like I was annoyed with how much people were moving around. If I go back next year, I'm gonna make sure to sit like above, maybe like 5-6 rows up, because that way the people walking at the bottom of the bleachers won't be in your way. But it's like, I'm trying to see the gap. At least 50% of the laps, somebody was in the way. I don't know if that's a street track thing, and the ticket prices are quite a bit cheaper than Formula One. Dirt tracks, they're always way out in the country, so anyone who hikes out there to go to that event, they're usually like diehard fans. And then F1, it's so expensive, you don't want to miss a minute of it. The races are similar length too. It was about a 2-hour race, so that's the same as Formula One. I just found it interesting that people were moving around so much. Now moving on to the cars themselves and the racing, here's what I noticed going on at the Arlington Grand Prix. I don't really keep up with IndyCar. I watch some of the highlights, but Formula One is something I watch every week. So this is just kind of some perspectives as a fan. So one of the things I noticed trackside was with the aero screen that the IndyCars run, you can't really see the steering wheel. I kind of like to watch the steering wheel as they're going around, especially the spot where we were in was the horseshoe. So it was kind of a big sweeping corner. And it's kind of fun because when you are watching the race, you can see how someone's tires are doing because you can see them start to work the wheel a little bit more. Of course, you can see the car sliding, but a lot of times it's really micro adjustments. But if you can see the steering wheel, you kind of can see more of what's going on. The car isn't changing angles dramatically. And I'm just kind of a nerd, and that's something I enjoy watching in Formula One, and you can't see it with the aero screen. Now, another thing was interesting to watch was basically in IndyCar, if it's paved, you can run it. In our section, there was kind of a painted like red and white curb thing, and then like a little bit of like infield area where it was, I think they had like a Dallas Cowboy star pattern. In IndyCar, you can run like anywhere that isn't paved, and obviously like, you know, you can't hit the wall. It was funny, and there was even an F1 fan behind me that was like, oh, in F1, everyone would have got a penalty. Me personally, I don't think that that's really good or bad that you could do that. I mean, obviously it should be consistent track to track, and there should be a precedent set for the series, but I don't mind either approach, whether it's like, if it's paved, you can run it, you know, like use all the runoff you want, track limits don't exist. Or like what F1's doing now, where it's like black and white, zero tolerance. It's just the nature of this series, and that's, you know, they're gonna drive using everything they can and every inch of pavement that's available to them. A couple things about the cars I noticed was they drive very differently to Formula One cars despite being an open wheel race car. So they seem a lot looser, like they have less grip overall than Formula One cars, but they also don't seem quite as agile as F1 cars. So like when people were pulling out of the draft to overtake, running alternate lines, or when they kind of like, you know, slide wide and get offline, the corrections they're making, the cars don't seem to be able to dart around quite like a Formula One car can. Now, I do think that a lower grip race car is gonna be better racing. The shorter the braking zones get, when you just have a ton of grip and you're not braking that much for even like a low speed or a 90-degree corner, there's less opportunity to overtake on the brakes. And then also it's more punishing to run offline, because the more grip a car has, the bigger a differential there will be in speed between running online and offline. So it discourages a lot of alternate lines and you know, some of the bullying people in their mirrors. The other thing in that horseshoe section that I noticed, which I found really interesting, was a lot of drivers seem to be using like the Senna throttle technique. Like you could hear them, they drop a gear, turn in, and then they were like getting on and off the throttle at their, and some drivers did and didn't do this. I noticed most of the Formula One drivers or former Formula One drivers like Romain Grosjean, Marcus Ericsson, and then Mick Schumacher, they weren't doing that technique. You could hear the car, like there wasn't a choppy throttle input. They would just, you know, brake, turn in, and then like roll back onto the throttle. But some of the drivers and some of the fast guys too, you didn't see the car jerking around. Like they were able to apply the technique in a way that wasn't upsetting the car. But it was funny to hear that, because you never hear in F1 anymore anybody like through the corner. It was fun to see drivers being able to be fast with pretty different driving techniques. And speaking of F1 drivers, Mick Schumacher, I love him. I think seems like such a cool guy. I'm a big fan of Michael Schumacher, so you want to see Mick do good. But man, he had a rough go of it. I mean, he got a penalty in like the first lap or two, I believe, a drive-through penalty. So I didn't see what he did, but it must have been pretty severe. And then later in the race, he kind of drove into somebody and half spun. Didn't seem to jive with the IndyCar very well. And then when it comes to overtaking, this track, you know, I don't think it was the best show of overtaking, because it had some high-speed kind of sweeping corners, but then it's Baku-esque, you know, it's just like high speed. It's apparently the longest straight on a road course that they have for IndyCar. But, you know, it's just straights into 90-degree corners. And I'm sure it's a fun layout. I actually saw a video of Scott McLaughlin saying that it was a really fun layout to drive. But as a fan, that's not the most entertaining thing to watch. There's no creativity with the moves. Like you get, you know, a section that has some switchbacks and some changes of direction where you can kind of set a move up 2 corners in advance. You get the draft, and then the person either defends or doesn't. And then if they defend, you try to go for the over-under. If they don't defend, you try to go up the inside. It's exciting in the moment to, like, you know, you don't know who's going to come out on top from the corner, but it's not the most thrilling form of wheel-to-wheel action to watch, in my opinion. Now, another thing when it comes to overtaking is that this race was incredibly clean. Like, I don't keep up with IndyCar, but there wasn't any cautions until towards the end. And I believe the car that caused the caution had a mechanical issue. It was kind of hard to tell because the acoustics for the announcements weren't great. So it was kind of just like, wow, wow. But overall, it was a very clean race. And I believe that mechanical failure was like within 10 laps at the end. And then unfortunately, there was another caution, so it finished under caution. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't like an abundance of safety cars the whole time. So that was kind of nice, especially for a street circuit. And it always feels a little bit rough when you're leading the race, building a gap, and then you lose it just to the safety car and get unlucky with the safety car's timing. The drivers seemed to race people that they weren't in a race with. I might be like missing some context here since I don't keep up with it. Like, I don't know if there's, championship beef going on between these guys or anything like that, but Scott McLaughlin, who I love him, like I think he's a savage. He started all the way at the back, like down in 25th, and he was racing people that were like contending for the lead, and then I think he finished around like 10th or 11th or something like that. Marcus Ericsson had come out of the pits. Now Marcus Ericsson led quite a bit towards the beginning of the race, and then he ended up, I believe, 3rd or 4th. But he was in contention for the win most of the race, really. So Ericsson comes out of the pits, and McLaughlin was racing him hard. Like, he was all over the back of him, trying to get around him. And I found that interesting because they weren't really racing each other. In my mind, it's like McLaughlin's on a recovery drive, trying to snag a few points, and Ericsson's fighting for the win. It doesn't do either of them any good to fight with each other because they're not like in the same race. McLaughlin's trying to minimize his losses, basically. He's trying to get something out of a bad weekend. And then Ericsson was looking for a race win. So it doesn't really do, if McLaughlin is truly faster, it doesn't do Ericsson any good to sit there and defend that because he's just losing time to the lead. Maybe Ericsson had a little bit of tire warm-up problems. It doesn't do you any good to fight someone coming out of the pits if they're ultimately going to be faster than you anyways. It doesn't make sense to fight someone that's going for the lead out of the pits like that because you're now losing lap time to 7th, 8th, and 9th. You lost 2 seconds battling Ericsson, and then this guy has a slow stop. So if you didn't lose that 2 seconds, you might have came out ahead of them instead of behind them. I don't know. That's just how I think, I've watching Formula One and even endurance racing. Everybody seemed to want to battle a car on track next to them, no matter who it was or what was going on with the race. That is good from a fan's perspective because you want to see the cars fighting and you don't want to see them just letting each other go. But also, I was like, does he just not care? Like he's just doing it for the love of the game. All right, and then more to do with the strategy, the pit rotation. So if you stop from the lead, you might fall down to like 4th, 5th, 6th. But eventually, once the people in front of you stop, you're gonna be back in the lead. It's not like a bad thing to be running in those lower spots for that time, unless you're losing time to them like I was talking about. I found that compared to Formula One, it seemed like the pit rotations, like a lot more time was gained and lost there. I mean, I was completely sleeping on Kyle Kirkwood. Like, I thought he was running around, like maybe gonna look at like a 3rd place finish, but he ended up winning the race. He was fast towards the end there, and once he got around Pelot, he pulled quite a gap. Definitely a little bit different when it comes to what the race situation is and who's effectively in the lead. And then also strategy-wise, like with there being more pit stops, it did seem like there was a lot more variation in strategy, because some drivers would stay out like 10, 15 laps longer than the other cars around them that they're racing. Kyle Kirkwood actually stayed out longer in the first stint, as well as Will Power. They both stayed out pretty long at the start of the race. And even the midfield, like they kind of get more shuffled up than F1, because in F1, like when one person stops, like everybody around them tends to stop. And then the people behind them also just kind of stop. So that way they're like on the same page if they're running in like a train. They seemed less bothered by what the other cars were doing and more interested in how they were running their own race. But I really enjoyed it, and it may make me watch more IndyCar, especially the street races and road courses. I think there's a lot of exciting action going on, and with it being a spec series, there's a little more question mark up at the front. Obviously, 2026 in F1 looks to be another year of Mercedes, which, I mean, that's part of the game. I've been watching for a long time, and I'm not scared of watching a season dominated by one team or another. But it is cool having a spec series. One thing I want to look into is how much of a difference the engine makes. It seems like it's not that big of a deal, but I want to look into the engines, and then I want to look into the tires. I know they're running like white, red, and black sidewall tires, so I don't know the differences between them, but it'd be fun to learn about that and keep up a little bit more with IndyCar. Overall, having been to an F1 race almost every single year, I did enjoy the race. I went with a friend of mine who's not as heavy into racing, and I think for a casual fan, the action that you see in IndyCar probably is a little bit better than F1, even though there isn't the marketing hype behind it. They don't have an IndyCar Netflix show. I'm somebody who always tries to weasel everybody I know into becoming a race fan, so maybe that's a good place to look because it feels a little more democratic. And I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that it's spec. People were kind of making major progress and falling back throughout the race, and there was kind of a lot going on all the time on track, which was fun. I'm still an F1 guy, but I definitely gained a lot of respect for IndyCar. And I think the event itself should probably look into some of the policies they have. I mean, everybody that was checking the tickets at the bridges and kind of restricting the movement throughout the venue, like was AT&T Stadium. They were wearing AT&T Stadium shirts. So Jerry Jones, I know you watch all my videos. Maybe just reconsider checking people's tickets and stopping them from walking around too much. But yeah, thanks for hanging out with me, and let me know if there's any other race series that I'm totally sleeping on and what you thought of the Arlington Grand Prix. Never thought I'd ever say that in my life.